Hi.
I'd like to start talking about the relationship between your biography and the larger cultural narrative of the Dharma in the West.
Hmm.
Because your story starts with formal training in Zen, and then as your practice goes through years of being co-abbot at the San Francisco Zen Center, it also starts to spread out into the intersection of Buddhism and Judaism, Christianity, technology, living in the Bay Area, and so on. And I think, on the one hand, while that's a fascinating biography, it also seems to be the cultural story about the Dharma, growing roots into Western soil, which is that the delivery system of the Dharma now is so diverse. It's not just people in robes or wearing the Buddha's cloth, teaching in front of a room who are nodding or bowing, doing formal practice, but it's really being delivered through hospitals and the education system and now mainstream media. And I was wondering if you could just speak to what you see happening in this sort of new delivery system.
Mm. Yeah, well, it is an unprecedented time. The idea, it's interesting to me that all the Buddhisms that we have inherited from Asia are all teachings and systems of practice rooted in feudalistic social systems.
Mm-hmm.
So that's got to influence, right, the
Mm-hmm.
teachings and the way they're delivered. But our system is anything but a feudalistic system. So the transmission of not only something that comes from such a time frame, but also across languages and cultures that are so different, makes the Buddhism that we're receiving a completely different thing than what it was then. And I think that the teachings themselves have a kind of restless seeking for a place in a society.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going in every which way. We're all, like you say, you pointed out about my own biography, nobody's life is just their life, right? Everybody's life is just an expression of place and time that we're living in.
Mm-hmm.
So, Buddhism, like water, flowing downstream, is finding every little rivulet and crack that it can flow into, and just going there naturally, without anybody figuring it out in advance. So it's going all over the place, and it's very interesting. And I'm interested in a lot of things, and so I've just responded to whatever was in the vicinity, and these things all took place, and Dharma is going that way. And we also need a new postmodern sense of religious practice.
Mm-hmm.
So many people have been wounded by religion and are allergic to religion in various ways for various reasons, that they just are not able to take on anything that looks like a religious trapping.
Mm-hmm.
But they're interested in professional training, and they're interested in opening their hearts, and they're interested in their own mental health, and they're interested in helping other people. And so Buddhism answers all these needs and provides a way for people to increase their ease and their skill. So it's I think it's kind of interesting, isn't it, the way it's going all over the place. And we were talking the other day about my article some years ago in one of the Buddhist magazines about Plan B.
Right.
And that these things are not mutually exclusive. The Buddhism as mindfulness or Buddhism as professional training, and this is not exclusive from more conventional forms of Buddhism. In fact, they need each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think they need each other, and they support each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my article about Plan B. Plan A is regular Buddhism. Plan B is everything else, and we need to do it all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a very interesting and creative moment in our culture and in the history of Buddhism.
Nowadays, as mindfulness becomes more and more popular, of course, last month it was on the cover of Time magazine, and it seems like that's just the beginning.
Yeah.
It might even surpass yoga in its popularity because of its acceptance in academia and in medicine. Sometimes when I hear people defining mindfulness as paying attention without judgment. There seems to be an association with mindfulness as strictly a practice of giving your attention to something.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at people who've been practicing a long time, or I also look in my own life, the way I understand mindfulness is more as the opening in my own heart to generosity,
Mm-hmm.
to forgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
to the feeling of being connected to something greater than just my little narrative and my own suffering.
Yeah.
And so, to me, I think of mindfulness as a religious experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry sometimes that because we're measuring meditators in fMRI machines all the time now, that we're reducing mindfulness to meaning just being able to pay attention to something.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if this is something that you've thought about or something you've noticed,
Mm-hmm.
because, again, of this plan A and plan B, one foot in the door of traditional practice and one in
Mm-hmm.
secular
Mm-hmm.
society.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, it's an important and interesting issue to think about. I remember years ago when I was living in the temple, this amazing character showed up, Raphael Paparinov. That's how I would say it.
Yeah.
He was a very proud Bulgarian guy.
Uh-huh.
And so he was an older guy, right? He had lived through World War II as a young man.
Yeah.
And he showed up at Green Gulch because he was a lifelong meditator. How did he become a lifelong meditator? Bulgaria, in the beginning of World War II, was on the Nazi side. And he was in the King's Guards or something like that. He was an elite soldier. So the Nazis, who were, of course, aligned with the Japanese, trained their elite troops in Zen meditation
Mm-hmm.
so that they could be more adept
Mm-hmm.
at fighting and killing without fear,
Mm-hmm.
just like Zen was used in the samurai times.
Right. With and kamikaze pilots. and so
Kamikaze
on.
pilots.
Yeah.
So this tells you that, yes, meditation practice can be used for to make people better at
Mm-hmm.
things that they shouldn't be doing in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a reasonable thing to be worried about. And the meditation in and of itself, just by itself, is not any guarantee of goodness and kindness and mercy in this world. So it's a reasonable thing to worry about. However, so meditation, mindfulness, taught with some guidance and some teaching and inspired in a certain direction, will lead, I think, naturally with that kind of guidance,
Mm-hmm.
just as you described, toward, first of all, just paying attention, but the just paying attention with the right direction will lead you to opening the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Opening the heart will lead you to compassionate and ethical conduct. You won't be able to feel comfortable and happy doing rotten things that hurt other people
Mm-hmm.
if you go down that path.
Yeah.
So I'm actually pretty confident myself, so far, in the essential goodness and intelligence of the programs that I'm aware of so far out there for mindfulness. Now, I know a lot of people who teach mindfulness in corporate settings, in health settings, and pretty much all the people that I know that are doing that
Mm-hmm.
are doing it with a sense of this kind of guidance that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but at the beginning is just pay attention, just get more effective at what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Just be able to be more effective not only in your work life, but also in your personal life, so you can have better relationships and do
Yeah.
better at work. That's the beginning, because that's how you introduce people
Yeah.
to the practice. That's how you get them to pay attention to it and motivate them to do it.
Mhm.
But then going down that road a certain amount, you begin to guide people to notice what you will notice spontaneously if you're actually aware.
Mhm.
You will notice
Mhm.
that it's painful to hurt other people,
Yeah.
that it's painful to do unethical things, and then the mindfulness will inevitably lead you to what in effect is a religious or a spiritual path, regardless of whether it's Buddhist or in any kind of context of an organized religion.
Mhm.
So when I say guidance, it's as if I guess what I should say more precisely is that real mindfulness will get you there, to this point, this ethical, compassionate point.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness that is geared toward a certain kind of performance
Mm-hmm.
and intentionally avoids
Mm-hmm.
the ethical and compassionate side can lead down some bad pathways, like Raphael Paparinov, although he wasn't a bad guy. I mean, he later changed.
Yeah.
So it does make a difference how we, and there is the possibility that mindfulness can be used for making you more effective at being a rotten person doing bad things. So that's something to pay attention to. But right now, all mindfulness movements and all the research, even, I mean, don't tell anybody in the scientific community, but the truth is that all the researchers are Buddhist practitioners and are motivated by their Buddhist practice to do the research that they're doing. That's why they're doing it. They're doing it explicitly to make a case for meditation in the culture. And now, down at Stanford, there's the Compassion Project. And this is now, compassion itself is becoming the successor, really, to mindfulness, or the entrainment, being trained to mindfulness as an adjunct to it, so that these things are all becoming one thing. The health benefits of compassion, the effectiveness of compassion, and all that is now part of the equation.
So then, how do you define mindfulness when you define it? When you know, so for example, I heard John Kabat-Zinn speaking recently saying mindfulness is a placeholder for the entirety of the Buddha's teachings. And that surprised me. Because usually you don't hear it articulated like that among the scientists. But when you're teaching, how do you define mindfulness?
Well, probably that's new for John, I'm guessing. That in his early books, he did have a very good working definition of it, which had to do with, I think it was something like paying attention on non-judgmentally on purpose, something like that. He wouldn't have said that early, but now maybe he's saying, because I think that reflects his, like everybody, he's in development and changing, and that probably reflects his recognition that compassion and ethical conduct is inevitably part of mindfulness if mindfulness is really developed fully. To be honest with you, in my thinking and practicing and sharing Buddhism with other people, mindfulness is not a term that I use that much. Mostly I'm talking about presence. Presence and full engagement with life in this moment. And that's how I would view mindfulness. Presence and full engagement with life in this moment, which inevitably does involve one's feelings, emotions, one's relationships with other people, and one's conduct in ethical life. As you know, in Soto Zen, precepts are at the heart of our practice. And precepts are not viewed just as ethical guidelines, do's and don'ts of conduct. They're viewed as enlightenment itself, awakening itself, being present in this human life as it really is, involves our loving connection to other people, which involves our wanting to help and not hurt, our wanting to take care of our conduct so that we don't do harm to other people, and so on and so on. So I think that's, to me, all of that, I would agree with John if he says it's a placeholder for all the Buddhist teachings. I think that's right.
Sometimes people are in such tremendous pain that they don't have the faith or the confidence that they can bring this kind of intimate engagement of, this meeting point of their body and what they're actually feeling. And there are longtime practitioners who sometimes turn away from practice because the pain is just so heavy. And then there's some people who are so terrified by this kind of woundedness that seems to just go on and on and on and on in their life. What brings people who are deeply in pain to the point where they can say, yes, I'm actually going to be intimate with this energy.
Mm. Well, I think it's support of others.
Mm.
Nobody can do this on their own.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I was living in the residential community of Zen Center, I used to always feel that there was a healing power in just being in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So we would sometimes get, really disturbed people showing up.
Yeah.
And we were not able to really do anything. We didn't have therapists on staff, or
Yeah.
we didn't. People had to just do the schedule and do the work,
Yeah.
and do the practice,
Yeah.
and that was all we could offer them. And it often wasn't enough for them to heal. But what we could offer them, in addition to all that, was just the feeling of being in a community where people accepted and understood the condition that they were in. Maybe they didn't know how to heal them, but they understood that this was a condition that human beings can be in. It was not something shameful. It was not something horrible. And there was a kind of loving recognition of this and support in that, in the community.
So you can't separate the community support from one's personal practice.
Yeah, that's right. And I think part of the pain and part of the reason why we suffer on and on and on is our sense of isolation and our loneliness. I think if you have the feeling that you are supported and that you are known by others who do understand and do care, that's 50% of your healing.
Yeah.
And I think, therapy, I think, is effective because in the end, you feel like your therapist knows you and cares about you and loves you in some way, supports you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that promotes, I think, as much as whatever skillful therapeutic interventions there are, it's the fact that a therapist, supports you and cares about you. That's 50% of the healing.
Yeah.
And if you can be, and in the world at large, people are so scared and confused by human pain that you don't get that feeling from, the average human community.
Yeah. Yeah, at the end of his life, Freud, when he was living in London, he wrote a paper about narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
And in the paper, which is often not read, he says that what's healing is not clever interpretations or the understanding of the transference or counter-projection in relationship. What's healing is just relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And that would bring people to a place where they could bear their unhappiness. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people just take that first part, or that second part, which is, is the goal of therapy really just to bear one's unhappiness? Isn't it joy,
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the more that I practice, the more I really see these two things connected.
Yeah.
The ability to be open to relationship and how it unfolds and allowing it to hold you.
Mm-hmm.
Relationship to anything that goes on for a number of years. Mm-hmm. And also the ability to really be in one's unhappiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that what we mean by pain or unhappiness in the end really is the isolation and the loneliness. Mm-hmm. If we feel involved in, held by, embraced by relationship, then in bearing our unhappiness, we can have some happiness. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So it's exactly our not wanting to face our unhappiness and our feeling isolated in it that is the actual unhappiness.
Yeah.
Because it's normal to be unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's normal to be, to me, if I hear somebody saying that they're in despair or they're depressed or they're unhappy, in their lives or worried about the state of the world, I always feel, well, that's normal. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Not to see those things and feel them from time to time seems to me quite unhealthy. Yeah. For somebody to be chipper and joyful seems like, well, what's wrong with him?
Yeah.
Because that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
People are dying. People are suffering. How could
Yeah.
you not care? How could you not be upset?
Yeah.
Look at the condition of our societies and
Yeah.
so on and so on. So, but to know that you're connected to others, and to know that these kinds of moments of unhappiness are normal and are bearable, and are even beautiful, because what are they if not the index of our caring, right? If I'm unhappy and brought down by your suffering, it means that I care about you. So I might be, in a glum mood because I'm contemplating your suffering, but I'm happy that I care enough to be in a glum mood over your suffering. So actually, there's a paradox there.
Yeah.
And happiness is not, clicking one's heels and dancing around all the time.
Yeah.
Happiness is caring and seeing
Yeah.
our lives. That, to me, that's what makes us really happy.
That's a beautiful definition of happiness, because there's something about the way happiness is being used nowadays that I get a little uncomfortable with, because, a century ago, just after Victorian times, the thing a lot of people suffered from, especially women, was being told they should always be good.
Yeah.
It was like the oppressive mantra
Yeah.
is that you should be good.
Yeah.
We can just look at our parents or grandmothers, and see this kind of pressure of needing to be good. And I feel the new mantra that's unconscious in the culture is that you should be happy.
Right.
It's like this carrot that's being dangled, and people are saying to themselves, well, maybe my unhappiness is not something to drop into. Maybe that's not the path, because I'm supposed to be happy.
Right, right.
So I've been thinking more lately of happiness being the byproduct of practice, rather than the goal of practice. The goal of one's spiritual life is freedom, which doesn't seem to be dependent on a feeling, happy or unhappy.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's right. I think you want to be able to appreciate fully, and be able to make use of for the unfolding of your life, whatever it is that's going on in your life now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's no restriction on what that could be or should be. The way I understand the teachings on the afflictive emotions is that they all basically source from the inability or the lack of vision to be able to do that. So
to do what exactly?
To be able to embrace whatever it is that's going on in your life as the path.
Right.
So feelings like compassion, sorrow are not afflictive emotions. Mm-hmm. Hatred, anger, greed, those are afflictive emotions, and I think they all source from our inability to connect and accept our human condition.
So in a way you could say the main problem with afflictive emotions is that they obscure the path. They obscure
that's
your
right.
life.
Afflictive emotions are all efforts to distract ourselves or remove ourselves from the fact of life. Mm-hmm. The fact of life, I think, is always healing, even when it's difficult, even when it's an unhappy moment. There's a healing in really being in your life. Mm-hmm. And I think all the afflictive emotions are really, the root of them is ignorance, right? Mm-hmm. I can't and won't be in my life. I've got to find another energy to spin me off into another direction. Mm-hmm. So I'll be envious, I'll be greedy, mm-hmm. I'll be angry, I'll be hateful. Mm-hmm. And that's not, we're missing the moment of our lives when all those emotions are exactly about bouncing us off from where we are.
Yeah.
So it's not about feeling good, because feeling good doesn't go very far. When we're sick and dying, we're not going to be feeling good, and practice doesn't end when that becomes the case.
Yeah. Practice
deepens and broadens when that's the case.
Yeah.
So it includes all of that, I think.
When I was in Japan, I met a priest who was also a fabulous potter, and one day he said to me, "You live in America?" I said, "No, actually I live in Canada." Mm-hmm. And he said, "The future of Zen is in America, but not the spirit." And so I said to him, "Well, what's the spirit of practice?" And he said, "Modesty."
Wonderful.
What's your take on this?
Yeah.
Because it's interesting when we're talking about Buddhist practice coming alive in our culture and everybody using it to pay attention or to be more present at work. The spirit of the practice that I really felt in Japan was this combination of modesty and warmth.
Yeah.
Even in the most formal monasteries, there was something really warm in a sense that you were with family.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful that you were able to feel that, because a lot of people who go to Japan and experience Buddhism there don't feel that. But I think that is, I agree with you. I felt that also in Japan, and I do feel like that is the essence of Japanese Buddhism, is modesty, humility. I use the word humility. Humility and warmth. That's right, absolutely. Yeah, and I guess maybe what that priest was commenting on was the overly enthusiastic, bordering on arrogant American approach to almost anything, you know, including Buddhism. So I agree with him, although I wouldn't say that spirit of modesty or humility isn't in American Zen or Canadian Zen. Certainly it is in the places where I practice. And I think it will become, as the practice matures, it is becoming more and more the case. I always say, you know, when I ordain priests, I always tell them there are 3 practices for a priest, but actually it's 3 practices for everybody. But when you're a priest, it's very explicit. The first practice is see everybody as Buddha. Every single person that you meet, you should understand that person is the Buddha, there to inspire you and teach you. Second, help everybody. Do whatever you can to help all the time. And third, be humble. Because I do feel like this sense of humility in relation to one's own life and abilities is essential to the practice, to any spiritual path. So I agree with this priest. Suzuki Roshi, our founder of our temples in San Francisco, he always had the dream that eventually the spirit that he was trying to share in America would go back to Japan. So he thought that bringing Buddhism to America was the best thing that he could do for Japanese culture and Japanese Buddhism, because he felt like it would only come around when it came from somewhere else back to Japan, because the Buddhist
genes or something.
Right. Because the Buddhist establishment there is so fixed. You know what I mean? It's hard to, in and of itself, it's hard to move it. But when influences come from outside, they have a freedom of movement. You know, like when I go to Japan, I can really be myself. I don't have to be part of their mindset. You know. So that's a beautiful. That's a very wise feeling. Yeah, it reminds me of my teacher is a wonderful person, and I just was. He wrote a wonderful. Recently, in the newsletter of his center, he wrote a wonderful poem that he gave. He gives every year a poem on the Memorial Day of his teacher, who was Suzuki Roshi. And I thought, I read that, it was so beautiful, and I said, I'm so happy that I don't have to have memorial services for my teacher. Because he's alive.
Because he's alive.
And I'm lucky in that way, you know, at my age, that my teacher can still be alive. But once I really pissed him off. I didn't mean to, but I pissed him off because I said, in talking about him, I said, well, he never taught me anything. And that was the great thing. He never taught me anything. That was the best thing. He didn't like that, you know. So years later, he always remembered that I said that. And years later, he, one time, you know, you write calligraphy on the back of a rakusu, and he wrote on the back of a rakusu, I have nothing to give you but my Zen spirit. And I thought that was a beautiful thing.
It's beautiful.
And so this spirit that you're talking about of Zen, the spirit of, you know, presence and modesty and caring, and especially just keep going. Not expecting too much from the practice, but just keep going forever and ever. That spirit is a tremendous spirit, and I really value it. And I think the implication of what you quote is that a lot of American Buddhism looks like it's trying to make improvements. The newer, the better. You know, mindfulness will make it all better, and Zen will make this and that happen. You know, and I think it's that's not really quite right. But we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, that touches on the last thing I wanted to talk
Mm-hmm.
about, which is when I was a younger man,
Mm-hmm.
my interest was in Vipassana practice,
Mm-hmm.
doing long periods of sitting and really looking at traditional maps
Mm-hmm.
where I could access states of concentration where there wasn't much happening.
Mm-hmm.
First noticing the arising of something, then the passing away, but then the
Mm-hmm.
passing away of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And really going deep into those states of really experiencing everything as fleeting
Mm-hmm.
and not having a big charge around it. It
Mhm.
wasn't dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
And now, 10 or 15 years later, I have 2 kids and I have a pretty large community, and my interest just isn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And not only is it not there anymore, I see it as a young man's story.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really touched by the spirit of practice where relationship is the core of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, in fact, what's really needed now in our time is intimacy as the core practice.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that intimacy is happening with your own heart, or it's happening with your baby,
Mm-hmm.
or your teenager,
Mm-hmm.
or people you don't get along with. It seems like your teaching revolves completely around this point,
Mm-hmm.
which is that yes, there are maps, yes, there are states of concentration, but the heart of the practice seems to be this message of engaged with every single moment.
Mm-hmm.
And in my own life, that's much harder.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, no, that's right. And I think that that is ultimately the practice. And in Zen, with Zen's view of Buddhism, it really does emphasize that, just as you say. But I also, as a young man, spent a lot of time on the cushion and a lot of intense time. So there certainly is a need for that, and a place for that.
I mean, that gave me some stability.
Well, exactly.
That, I mean,
and a grounding, and a
exactly.
foundation, So I think that we may find as we go along here that the majority of Buddhist practitioners in our culture who will benefit enormously from the practice and whose lives will be transformed by it will not do that kind of intense practice that you and I did when we were young. But that intense practice will continue to be done by a minority of people, and it will be an essential thing that minority of people do that practice to keep that foundation firm and alive. Because I think the Buddhist practice that the rest of us do, does depend on that.
Yeah.
And I remember there's one famous teacher, Bankai, who taught in Japan, and he, I forget what century he was in, maybe the 18th century. He would say, I remember being really impressed by this, he would say, you guys don't have to do all this hard stuff. I sat till I had calluses on my butt, but you don't have to do that because I did it.
Uh-huh.
So now you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's right. I think not everybody has to do it, and we can get the benefit of the people who have done it.
Yeah.
Whether we get it directly from them, like you, having done that, now directly can communicate with other people, or whether we get it indirectly through just the mass of the tradition itself. But someone needs to continue to do that. We can't, because I think if we lost that altogether, if no one ever did that kind of practice, and we lost track of it, we would lose the basic moorings of Buddha Dharma. But as long as someone's doing it, as long as it's offered, and as long as there are those who will maintain it, the vast majority of people, I think, can practice in ways that are more doable for most people. Probably you, as a young man, were a lunatic like me, who would stop at nothing in order to do this.
Yeah.
And that's not everybody. It's not possible for everybody, and not everybody has that spirit and that need. Yeah. So, but it's good that you did it.
Yeah. Well, my life was, in a way, I said at the time that I just wanted to be free. And that if this practice really promised enlightenment, I wanted that.
Yeah, right.
In retrospect, I also see the inability to really be related.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. We were, those of us who had that mania had issues going on we didn't even know we had.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But listen, this is old Uncle Buddha manipulating us to get us to do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And so we can't complain.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.